I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and next to me is one of the most interesting and relevant new vehicles to be released here in Australia in 2024. This is the BYD Sealion 6, and unlike the other vehicles BYD has launched in Australia so far, this one is not fully electric. It's a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid with quite decent electric range, as we'll see in today's video, but a hybrid all the same, meaning that on road trips you can fuel this vehicle with petrol, making life considerably easier with the state of charging as it is in 2024 in regional Australia. So for many buyers, a plug-in hybrid could be an interesting compromise. But really for me, the main event about the Sealion 6 is its incredible pricing. This vehicle that I have next to me is actually the current base model Sealion 6, the Dynamic. So it's front wheel drive, but an all-wheel drive model is optional. But as we'll see shortly, the level of amenity and features in this vehicle is staggering for just over $52,000 drive away. So we're talking a base model Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid being 10 grand more than this car, basically specified like a rental car with cloth seats and a plastic steering wheel. This thing is barely more expensive than a base model Toyota RAV4 hybrid, and yet it's a plug-in hybrid with almost 100 kilometers of EV range. How are they doing it? Well, the European Union, for one, is asking questions about that with their tariff policy at the moment. But if you're an Australian customer, the Sealion 6 looks like an incredibly affordable way to get into a well-specified hybrid SUV. So, is it too good to be true? We're going to find out in today's video. Before we get started, hit subscribe below. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. As I mentioned up front, the vehicle that I'm testing is the BYD Sealion 6 Dynamic front-wheel drive, which is the base model here in Australia. It costs 48,990 Australian dollars before on-road costs. So this exact car that I'm sitting in with premium paint outside is around 52.5 drive away in New South Wales. Now that is sharp pricing for a hybrid SUV that's relatively roomy like this one. A few years ago, that kind of money could get you into a pretty nicely spec'd Toyota RAV4 hybrid, but those prices have really gone up. So 52, 53 on road, you're looking at a Toyota RAV4 GXL, which is only one up from the base model, certainly not as nice as this car inside. If you want a plug-in hybrid, you do have relatively cheap options like the MG HS, but not as good to drive, smaller, not as premium. The Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid, which is a good vehicle, is just way more expensive. The ES base model with a plastic steering wheel and a pretty low rent interior is $62,000 drive away. So you're spending much more than the Sealion 6 to get into a decently specified Outlander. So we start on a pretty big price advantage. But what is the interior like? Well, every time I road test a BYD, I notice their interior is getting a step more refined and sophisticated and honestly less weird. And I think that's exactly what you see in the Sealion 6. Still, not everything will be to everybody's tastes. You can only get this caramel with red accented interior on the base car. If you spend up on the all-wheel drive, you get all-wheel drive, you get a bit more power, but you also get the choice of a light grey interior, which might do it for you, but there's no black interior across the range. So I kind of like that because I love something a bit different, but if you prefer a more traditional conservative interior, this car probably won't suit you. Otherwise though, much about the interior is quite conventional and quite attractive. Normal looking steering wheel, you've got hard buttons rather than touch capacitive ones, so this all works well. You do have a control panel down here for things like your drive modes and to force the vehicle into EV or hybrid settings, and we'll come to all of that later. Quite a nice little shifter, which kind of emulates for me the crystal ones in a Volvo, not a bad dupe. And then up here, we've got a pretty cool trick rotating touchscreen. Now that's something BYD likes to do. I do notice that I can see the screen a bit better when it's in vertical because there's some kind of coating on the screen which generates a little bit more reflection for me right over here, and it tends to wash out the left side of the screen from my perspective. It almost looks like a screen you could reach out and tilt towards yourself. I'd love it if you could, but you can't. So I've just noticed it's not the most visible screen in direct sunlight. So that's something BYD could fix. But you do have a digital cluster in front of you with some degree of customization. But compared to this screen where the software is quite well executed, and in particular you have a massive canvas for wireless Apple CarPlay, I've noticed, the driver's cluster looks generic. It looks like something you've maybe bought off AliExpress, where the fonts don't match what's over here, and just not really sure enough effort's gone into the presentation of that screen, but I'm nitpicking, aren't I? The materials otherwise, generally reasonable, quite soft down here. You've got a sort of fake leather dash that doesn't look especially convincing, but lots of soft materials and really good speakers as well. Infinity premium stereo, it actually sounds good. And the seats are reasonably comfy, not leather, it's a vinyl, but they're heated and cooled as standard. Again, at this price, that's insane. No lumbar adjustment, but we do have 8-way power adjustment over here for the driver. That works pretty well. To be honest with you, I quickly learnt this interior and have found this car to be a comfy urban cruiser for running around and doing errands, and also for longer drives, perfectly supportive. So the takeaway would be, this interior is much nicer than what almost any rival would give you at this price in a hybrid SUV. Moving to the back seat now, it's a good time to point out that the Sealion 6 is on the big side for a midsize SUV, so it is going to be noticeably larger than mainstream options like a Mazda CX-5, for instance, and you get the dividends of that here in the second row mainly. The driving position is set up for me. I'm 6 foot tall, 183 centimeters, quite long legs, and yet, as you can see, behind my own self, I've got plenty of room. Legroom's good. Toe room is quite tight, however, with this seat on the deck. Headroom is good, but I probably would have expected a little bit more. Not sure if perhaps the seating is a little higher than normal, because in some markets you can get the Sealion 6 as a full EV called the CLU. That's not available here in Australia at this stage, but we do expect a full EV called the Sealion 7 to launch here soon. For now though, it's plug-in hybrid or bust for this model. You could get someone here in the center seat quite easily because the floor is completely flat, which is admirable. Down here we have air vents as well for the rear. No separate climate zone, but still good to have the air flowing, and 2 more USB ports, one of each style, the old and the new. Impressively, all the soft materials actually continue here into the back. In this segment, usually you get a big plastics downgrade in the second row, not in the BYD. Flip down armrest here with 2 cup holders, so it makes road trips a little bit easier. If you've only got 2 people traveling in the back, you've got things like bottle holders back here too. And it's also worth mentioning that while we're not using it today, you get a panoramic opening sunroof as standard on the Sealion 6, which is certainly nice. Moving around the back of the Sealion 6 now, a word on the design of the vehicle. Frankly, I think it's handsome enough. Relatively generic. They've taken the front end from the BYD Seal electric sedan, which has been in market here in Australia for a few months now, whereas the rear end is more bespoke with the de Rigueur full width light bar that we're now seeing on virtually every new wagon and crossover, so much so that it's actually lost its distinctiveness, but I certainly don't mind the looks of this car. You can let me know what you think down below. One interesting thing, they all look the same. Doesn't matter if you go for the dynamic or the premium, they have the same 19-inch wheels outside. We also have a standard power tailgate, which is great. That opens up quite quickly and it reveals a boot which is reasonably sized, but certainly not best in class. It's actually a little bit narrow in terms of the aperture. It's a little bit high, but something like a Volkswagen Tiguan, which is a much smaller car, has up to 615 litres. That's not a plug-in hybrid though, so I guess it gets a bit of a free ride based on that. You'll still get some suitcases back here, no issue. Lift up the boot floor though, you only find your tyre repair kit and your compressor. There's no spare wheel with this car, which could be a headache in the country if you get a puncture. We do have a little baggie here with some charging cables in it, and BYD is actually still running an incentive here in Australia for a wall box with the vehicle too. You do have some storage space down here to the left. Otherwise, controls to close the tailgate or close it and lock the vehicle, so you can just walk away. Now, having looked at all the interior features, it's time to talk about the running costs of the vehicle.
Before we discuss servicing and warranty, I need to run you through the detail on the way the BYD Sealion 6 uses electricity and fuel, because it's quite interesting. Normally, low running costs are central to making it worth spending more on a hybrid, particularly a plug-in hybrid. But in this case, with the purchase price being so sharp compared to even non-hybrid midsize SUVs, The Sealion 6 strictly doesn't even need to be that cheap to run in order to make sense. However, it is. When run in EV-only mode, electricity consumption is quite miserly. We clocked an average of 17.1 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers without waking up the petrol engine. But 25% state of charge is the minimum the system will allow before the engine kicks on. So despite the battery being 18.3 kilowatt hours in usable size, only 13.7 kilowatt hours is truly usable, giving you a still decent range of 80 kilometers. The reason the software wants to keep minimum 25% charge in the battery is to make sure the weedy petrol engine's inadequate power never has to reveal itself. Always having reserve from the battery ensures this. Unsurprisingly, allocating such a huge buffer to itself, fuel consumption once the engine has forced itself on was a very low 4.1 litres per 100 kilometres. From the 60-litre fuel tank, that will give you driving range on petrol of 1,463 k's. Moving now to scheduled maintenance, which the Sealion 6 asks for every 12 months or 20,000 kilometres. Still, 5 years are cheap, coming up at $1,543 for our front driver, or about $100 more for the all-wheel drive premium. Warranty is where the Sealion 6 stumbles just a little bit. The vehicle warranty is 6 years, which is good, but only 150,000 kilometers, which is a little bit short on mileage compared to others, while the high voltage warranty is the more standard 8-year, 160,000 kilometer arrangement.
Okay, so let's go for a drive in the BYD Sealion 6 to see what this vehicle is like dynamically. Now, in my road testing, I've done everything that you would reasonably do with this car. I have commuted in it on electric power, not on electric power. I've driven it on the highway using mainly the fuel from the petrol tank, and I've driven it on country roads, the sorts of difficult B roads that you might find if you take an annual family road trip to the coast. You get off the highway and then the car's got to negotiate some classic bumpy, windy Australian country roads, a bit like the one that we're on now. And you know what? By and large, the Sealion 6 is absolutely fine to drive. Probably better than fine, actually. I'd say it's a little bit above average. What it mostly is a very quiet and comfortable crossover, which I think is exactly what most Aussies shopping in this segment really want. It doesn't have the biggest alloy wheels, it doesn't have low profile tires or sports tuned suspension or anything like that. Instead, it's very soft and plush. Not in an uncontrolled manner. You don't get car sickness from this car, which is good. The body control is actually reasonably decent, but the ride really does trend towards compliant and even plush, and that's exactly what I want from a vehicle like this. At the moment, we're driving the car on a really pockmarked road north of Sydney, and the car does a really great job soaking up the worst of those bumps. It only starts to get flummoxed where you've got 4 or 5 potholes or scars on the road in a row, and it starts to just lose track of its ability to keep up with the bumps. But most of the time, the Sealion 6 is a very, very comfy vehicle indeed. Now, what is going on under the skin and under the bonnet? Well, this is the first BYD to come to Australia with the company's DMI plug-in hybrid system, which works a little bit different to some of the other hybrid systems out there on the market. There's a very modest petrol engine, and it's mainly there to act as a generator for the electric motor and the battery. Now, the engine can actually drive the wheels, and it will do so on the highway where it's reasonably efficient to do so, but most of the time it's generating power for the 18 kilowatt hour usable LFP blade battery that's packaged beneath the Sealion 6. And because we've got the Sealion 6 dynamic, it's front wheel drive only, which means we've got a drive unit on the front axle. Now that's quite a bit more powerful than the petrol engine. So the electric motor generates 145 kilowatts of power by itself. Claimed combined power is 160 kilowatts for the vehicle. It actually feels a little bit more powerful than that, to be honest. At first I had to check that we didn't have the all-wheel drive, and we don't. This is the front drive car. but it feels reasonably perky at speeds under 100 kilometers per hour. Above that, you do notice that you've got to wind out that engine a little bit in order to make progress, but given the national speed limit in this country is 110, for most drivers at most times, the Sealion 6 has adequate performance. It's also, as I mentioned before, surprisingly economical, at least in terms of its electricity consumption. So if you can engage with this car and charge it regularly, its running costs are genuinely very, very low indeed. However, if you're not going to charge it and you are going to be relying on that engine more than someone that can charge it regularly, then you may want to consider more powerful and potentially non-hybrid options, or alternatively a fully electric vehicle. Because for a little more money than this car, you could be getting into something like a Tesla Model Y, which is similar in size, has even better packaging, and is fully electric. Now, I appreciate that EVs certainly don't match everybody's lifestyles, but an electric car with sort of 400 Ks of real-world range is going to tick the box for a lot of Australian families. So if you don't actually need the plug-in hybrid's significant extra flexibility for road tripping, where you do want to do the best part of 1,000 Ks without filling up, an EV could make sense. But where there's a big difference between the Sealion 6 and the Tesla Model Y is the BYD is so much more comfortable over bad road surfaces. The refinement and the ride is night and day between a Sealion 6 and a Model Y. And I think that's an amazing achievement. This car is so much more plush and comfy than the ubiquitous Tesla, but I actually think the ride is even better than a Toyota RAV4 hybrid, which is already pretty comfy, while the body control and the handling is easily superior to the Mitsubishi Outlander. So BYD have managed to tune a vehicle here which is genuinely decent and fit for purpose in terms of its dynamics in this segment, and that's really impressive. As I mentioned, the refinement's pretty good, very little road noise or wind noise enters the cabin, so you can really enjoy that stereo. Now, the safety features are a little bit hit and miss, so every time you turn the Sealion 6 back on, lane keeping assistance is activated by default, and most of the time you don't notice it, but sometimes it will just out of the blue decide to yank at the steering wheel. So it's not like it's strong but consistently strong. Instead, it's strong but it sort of activates when you don't really expect it. So I find myself turning that off, but to do so you've got to dive through 3 or 4 menus, so it's not just one button, unfortunately. Same thing with the speed sign recognition. This is a car that beeps at you if you exceed what it thinks the speed limit is. Doesn't always get that right, however. So if you want to turn that off, again, you've got to be diving into the menus in this vehicle. However, didn't annoy me too much. Frankly, I could probably live with it, but it is worth mentioning the safety tech stack in this car doesn't feel as well tuned as in some other vehicles. So having conducted a thorough road test of the 2024 BYD Sealion 6, what is my verdict about this vehicle? Well, I think it is very, very good for the price. BYD has come in and given the hybrid SUV market here in Australia a massive shake-up. It's not the first time we've seen a surprisingly affordable plug-in hybrid. The MG HS has been at a good price for a number of years now, but that car isn't very good. Unlike that, the Sealion 6 is very good. It's comfortable and supple to drive, not particularly sporty, but I don't think you really want that in this segment. And the interior has a massive amount of convenience and amenity for what is an astonishingly sharp price, undercutting something like the Outlander plug-in hybrid by at least $10,000 before you even account for specification. Now, there are people out there who question how this car can be so cheap, and tariff investigations in Europe and America are trying to get to the bottom of that question for Chinese cars, generally speaking. But this channel isn't about coming to political verdicts about car pricing. It's about how Australians can drive their dollar the furthest on a new car purchase. And at this point in time, the BYD Sealion 6 is astonishingly well priced for what it delivers, particularly if you can pick this car up on a novated lease with a full FBT waiver. You're eligible for purchases before April 2025 if you want to pick up on something like that. It can make this car really very affordable compared to its rivals. So all in all, I like it. I think this car ticks the box of being fit for purpose as a hybrid powered midsize SUV. Very keen to know your opinion. Please let me know down below this video in the comments what you think about the Sealion 6 or its rivals. While you're there, hit subscribe and the notification bell if you like the way we do our road tests here on Chasing Cars. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.